All right, so we start off with a little bit of WordPress news and events. As I was saying to Peter, it seems like it's that light time of year in between major WordCamps going on. But one that we missed, surprisingly we missed it in our last meetup, was WordPress 5.7 got released in March. So this is March 9th. And there are some features I think that are probably noteworthy. The first one is the ability to drag and drop blocks directly from the block inserter, which for some reason I always thought you could do, but I guess you can't. So now, if you have the blocks on the left-hand side of your column, you can just drag a block and drop it into your page in Gutenberg. So that was one change that came with 5.7. Some of the other stuff are minor things like the enhancements to reusable blocks, some stability and performance improvements that were done there. This is kind of a funny one, the text labels for the block toolbar. And maybe at some point when we go through demos, we can demonstrate this. But if you go into preferences, appearance, where there's a lot of visual icons previously, now for the toolbar, you can have text there instead. So that's good, especially as you're learning the block toolbar. If you're not familiar with what an icon may represent, now you have text that tells you what it is. Just some, again, quality of life things, the ability to customize font sizes in the list block or the code block. And a lot of the other updates, I think, were behind the scenes more for developers and people who are doing theme building. So you can search on WordPress.org. There's a couple links to different articles that explain all the changes for 5.7. So that's already out. I assume most people by now probably have updated to it. So it probably wasn't anything that you noticed necessarily, because a lot of it was behind the scenes. The bigger one coming up soon, if it's still, I think it's still on track as far as I know, it's May 24th, WordPress 6.0 is coming out. and again, for people maybe missed some of our earlier
why is Sue's so big?
Our earlier presentations from earlier in the year.
Tell Sue to mute.
There was, sorry, can you mute yourself, please? I'm going to mute all.
Oh shit, my bad.
No problem, mute all. So as I said earlier in the year, we had that big WordPress release. So now this year, because things got backed up a little bit, we're going to have quite a few WordPress releases coming up in 2022. So 6.0 is a big one coming up May 24th. So we'll probably dedicate, I think, depending on how stable this thing is, we may dedicate our May meetup entirely to this topic. So there's some editor refinements. There's pattern expansions. The navigation block has some refinements. The ability to find blocks, especially find reusable blocks, that's been improved a bit. And then design tooling. So there's been some changes there as well too. So it's still being tested out. So we don't know exactly what the final version of this will look like. But stay tuned for hopefully in our May meetup. Like I said, we can go through this in a lot more detail. That was like the big news and events. Peter, did you say there were a couple of meetup events that you want to call people's attention to?
Yeah, there is. Oh, we've got another voice again. There is, let me call it up. I got too many windows open. The first one that's coming up tomorrow.
You shut up.
I don't know if Ray, you can find who that is. The first one coming up tomorrow is the Web Agency Summit. So it's at Atarim, atarim.io/summit. So this is while it's geared for web agencies, there's always a lot of really great speakers at this particular one. They've done it under, I think, different names over the years, but that starts tomorrow until the 29th. So there's a lot of speakers in the next 3 days. It's free. Yeah, atarim.io, and then it's /summit, SUMMIT. And the other one, so that's tomorrow. And the other one coming up is another word sesh, WRODSHSESH.com, word sesh. And that's going to be May 16th through the 20th. So that's another multi-day, multi-speaker event, and also free. It's always been free. So Word Sesh next month, May 16th, and starting tomorrow is the Web Agency Summit.
Peter, someone asked, can you put those in the chat, please?
I will do that right now. Yep.
All right, perfect. Okay. And I hate to do this, but because we've had a little bit of incidents recently, I think I'm going to unfortunately put, when we're doing the presentation, I'm going to put everyone on mute while we're presenting. So if you do have questions, I'd say the best thing to do is raise your hand. So Peter and I are going to be monitoring this and facilitating it a bit. So if we see somebody raise their hand, or put it in the chat window as well too, we'll ask things that way rather than just having people disrupt through inadvertent or advertent unmuting of themselves. So, all right, so let's jump into, oh, I'm sorry, Peter, you got a tool or a tip to share?
Yeah, let me quickly show the screen and see what I have. I've got so many windows open, Ray. So sorry about the delay. Share screen.
Right.
Okay, and I'm going to share this screen here. Share, and it's this tool here. It's another one of these many tools within one tool. And it's the URL is 115.io. I think they're going for a visual. It looks like the word tools using all numbers. So 10015.io. And what's kind of neat, and I'll just scroll without going into each and every tool that's in here, but there are text tools, image tools, CSS tools, coding tools, color tools, social media tools, miscellaneous tools. So there's things like, your lorem ipsum generator and your letter counters, case converters, all these types of things that when you're going through, and this is just a nice mix if you wanted kind of one toolbox to use when you're like, if you had a photo you wanted to blur somebody's face out or something like that, there's actually a photo sensor tool here, and so on, if you're learning CSS and you need some code and on. But yeah, it's a toolbox filled with many tools that just kind of take a look and see if anything applies here. Every once in a while you need, like the hex to RGBA converter, for example, is just kind of in this toolbox. So it's 115.io.
Do you have to set up an account or anything to use that?
Nope.
Or just
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all free. It's pretty cool. And what's nice is, yeah, you go right into things, and oh, my mouse is acting funny, but it's just a straight, your case converter. It's like I am entering words and I want to put that into sentence case. I click sentence case. I want to put it into all uppercase, lowercase. So there are other tools to do that, but this little package is just clean. There's some advertising in it and all, but it's still, it's still a cool, simple little tool. That's just one of the dozens of tools that are in here. And
Sue was asking, Peter, Sue was asking, have you installed this in Chrome, or do you have any issues running it in Chrome?
No, I'm in Chrome right now. It is just a it's in the browser, so there's no extensions or anything like that. So it seems to work fine for everything I use so far.
Are you running any ad blockers? She's asking you.
Yeah, I don't have it. I haven't tried it with ad blockers on to see if it either says "Hey please," the "Hey please" message, or whatever. You can see obviously there's there's some ad placement square and so on as we go down, so that they're looking to supplement through the ad placements. But
it's nice. Yeah, this is neat. Just add all in one spot. I mean, I have all different links to these things, and having one place.
Yeah.
Works really nice.
Yeah,
Cool.
drop your text in, sentence, how many sentences, how many words, how many letters you're using, if that's important to you. So and on and on. The list keeps going.
Very neat.
All right.
You always sound good, Peter. All right, let me grab the screen back.
Yep.
And I share my desktop. Okay, so that was our intro. All right, so here's tonight's main topic. And so again, the topic is you've inherited, we'll talk a little bit about giving context to this later. So you've inherited a WordPress website, now what? So our agenda for tonight, we'll do introductions of ourselves. Peter and myself will quickly introduce ourselves. So we'll talk about, give some background to this. So understanding what you've inherited. You know, it can be stressful when you first learn that you're inheriting a website. So we'll just kind of cover that topic a bit broadly. And we'll go through some specifics. So identifying your domain and hosting. So Peter will cover some ways to do that. I'll talk about managing email accounts, some things you may want to consider. We'll spend quite a bit of time, I think, on WordPress itself, you know, validating the core of what have you been handed over. So we'll kind of look at WordPress settings, look at user roles, themes, etc. I'll talk a little bit about other integrations, so other things that may be connected to your, or either connected directly or indirectly to your website that you may want to consider. Then we'll wrap up some Q&A and some final thoughts. So as I said too, that if you have questions during the presentation, Peter and I will be monitoring the chat, or feel free to raise your hand in the participant window. We'll unmute you that way, and feel free to ask your question. So I'll go first. I'm Ray. I'm one of the co-organizers of the Hartford WordPress Meetup Group. I was a software developer for most of my career. I worked for some larger corporations. Been using WordPress for, I guess, roughly around 6-ish years. I keep trying to do the math on it. Currently self-employed. I run a website design business on my own. I live in Newington, Connecticut, married, no kids, and one crazy cat, and I'm a geek. And Peter.
Yeah, I'm Peter Ingersoll. I've been using technology for marketing, communications, and creative for most of my adult life. I do build and maintain websites for a number of clients and myself. I've been using data-driven websites, and then moved from what I was creating myself to WordPress, which was a great transition from trying to figure out how to do it to do it yourself to, you know, having this great tool available to us. I worked at the Hartford Current, an advertising agency, some logistics companies and all. I'm self-taught in most everything. And I live in South Windsor, married with 2 adult children and 2, I gotta change that, they're cats. And they're hanging around somewhere around here. One's looking at me like, why are you looking at me? But yeah, that's me.
They're not kittens. I know they grew up quick.
Not kittens anymore.
So I'm going to recap a project that we're doing that we'll touch upon today. The focus of today's presentation isn't this necessarily, but if you go back and look at some of our past presentations, we'll probably reference this project quite a bit. So just to give you some context of that. So probably going back almost a year now, we started this idea of let's build a website from scratch over the course of multiple meetups. So as I said, you can go back on YouTube and find the different stages of that. But we've continued to use that framework of that website just to do other topics. So tonight's topic isn't directly related to it, but I guess it could be like if we hand it off to you or somebody gave you this website, what would you do with it? So as I said, go back if you want to learn more about the project we did. And again, the purpose of that was teaching people how to build something from scratch, but also you know, doing it on the cheap. So everything we've been showing so far has been using free plugins, etc. So that project was focused around building a fictional nonprofit, so an animal rescue site. And as I said, even though we've been doing it specifically for an animal rescue, the things we've been doing, the topics aren't, it can be for any type of website that you're building. So feel free to go back and check that out. And the site is actually live and public. So if you go to build.hartfordwp.com, you can see what we've built so far. But tonight's topic is, again, it's you've inherited a website, WordPress website, now what? And, you know, again, to kind of kick this topic off a little bit, you know, I think many of us either, even if you've built, well, it's good to build a site from scratch, but I think a lot of us have gotten into WordPress either through having to maintain somebody else's site or helping somebody with a site, or even as you're first getting involved, maybe you're volunteering on somebody's website, or if you're, you know, working professionally like myself and Peter and others on this call, you quite often have to look at somebody else's site and work on someone else's site. So over time, you know, we've developed some ideas and some techniques for quickly understanding a site, because that's, I think, the thing that's daunting for people, especially if you're not very technical. Somebody says, here, you're now the new website owner. For whatever reason, the other person's gone or whatever. It's, we hope through tonight's presentation give you a little bit more confidence and some things to think about. And also, if you're the one creating a new site from scratch, you should give some consideration to the next person. So you may not always own this site, and if you're successful with the business or whatever, maybe you're going to sell this off to somebody else, or you get other volunteers helping you out, or new employees. So hopefully this topic covers you and somebody else, again, if you're building something from scratch.
Yeah, and Ray, in addition to that, I think one of the things we talked about is a lot of what we're going to talk about really does apply to kind of any WordPress admin. Some of the clues and some of the things that, when you want to do an audit of, hey, what's the status of my site? So,
right.
For just about everybody.
So, one of the first things you want to find is, just like we talked about, if you're building a site for a client, you want to find out some history of what their needs are. Well, if you're inheriting a website, I would say one of the first things you want to do is find out some history of that website. So, when was it built? Who built it? From a when was it built, I think where that can be important is understanding, different technologies that may have been used, understanding the look and feel of it. So if a site has been around for 10 plus years, it may not have started off on WordPress. And things may be connected to and glued to that site that, it'll help you appreciate, like, oh, okay, this is why something was done a certain way. The who built it part is important, because not just, to track somebody down, but, are they still in contact with that developer? Can you reach out to them if you have questions? Or was it built by an agency that's long gone, or, something else, bad blood happened, bridges were burned, you can't reach out to them. And then just from a context standpoint, why was it built? What was the whole purpose of this site? Was it built? We talked earlier on, when you're, back to our demo site, about understanding your audience, et cetera. Kind of, why are you building this thing? Is it a blog? Is it a business? Is it a nonprofit? Kind of, what were the goals of the site when it's first built? And going into that is, who's the target audience for the site? So understanding it, because as you start inheriting the site, first steps are you just taking over the keys, but then later you want to do some work to investigate, is that target audience being met? Or there's some things you can do to improve things on the site. Peter, anything to add on, like, the history of the site, just from a general standpoint?
Now, one of the interesting little clues in terms of, like, who built it and all, and I talk in terms of clues because a lot of times somebody inherits a site and there's a lot of mystery behind it, and kind of what you're implying, but it could be, it's the classic, the nephew of the previous owner, or somebody else who there were other things involved in the process. So the more you can know about that, if you're inheriting a site, the better, because then you have context for why you're seeing things, the timing. Why am I looking at plugins that seem outdated, or themes that look a certain way? So all of those kind of help give context to the site that you'll now be working on.
Right. So, one of the things you want to try, if you're lucky, you're very lucky, there's a lot of existing documentation out there. Most people are not that lucky. But this is where you want to at least begin the process of gathering what is known. So I would, the first thing you want to start with, it seems obvious, but is get the login credentials, basically, of every account associated with the website. And we'll cover some of these accounts in a bit more detail as the presentation goes on, that there's actually quite a bit more than this. But the basics, like the login, the WordPress admin login credentials, the web hosting login credentials, the domain, email, FTP, et cetera. Like I said, we'll talk about these a bit in more detail later. But not, so hopefully someone has them documented. Most likely you're going to find different people have, especially if you're, let's say it's a nonprofit who I've worked with and Peter works with quite a bit too. Quite often those things have changed hands. There've been different board members coming along, and you're going to have to hunt things down and say, hey, who has this information? Who's paying, who's doing this? And where can I get these different bits of information from? But once you have those credentials, just as importantly is try to use them, try to log in, because that's where you're going to find some other potential surprises. Like two-factor authentication always hits me. It's like, you try signing in, it's like, oh, it's going to call this phone number. Nobody recognizes the phone number, or, oh, that was so-and-so who's been gone for a while. So make sure you can get into things.
Yeah, no, that's that is a big deal. Things tied to phone numbers and personal accounts and all, and we'll try to remember to cover that again as we go through. But yeah, if you enter in a situation where this is new, one, do this ASAP, just before somebody is completely, if you're somebody who is actually taking on a job, or you're in a position, and this happens a lot, you're in a role somewhere, you're the office manager, there was maybe a communications person, they leave, and it's like, oh, guess what, you're now running the site. Just in that transition, make sure that you grab this information as soon as you can, because as time passes, it gets harder and harder to recover some of that info.
And again, if you're not lucky enough for somebody to hand you a binder or whatever, the electronic binder with all these accounts, it's your best interest to start documenting it. You should really start creating that document, and I'm using air quotes, but that consolidated piece of information of all those different accounts. And as I said, if you think about beyond yourself, the next person who may come along and require that, you'd save it on a shared protected location, Google Drive or something like that, where it's locked down. I'm assuming the worst person in this giving this advice, but because I don't always consistently use these kind of services, but using a password vault service like LastPass. So having a consolidated place where all the passwords are, and then you just have one master password to that, and you can control that, so you're not having things floating around in the ether, even if it's a Google Drive. It's just kind of the basic information that you want to put down. There's probably a lot more to it. Is what is the account? So kind of in English, what is this? What's the purpose of the account? Maybe the provider, let's say GoDaddy or something. Then the credentials, user ID, password, a URL to it, because some of these accounts you may forget how did I log in. This is a purpose. You can put a little bit of text for yourself. Expiration. So again, if we're talking about paid, or where you have to do some billing thing, when does this thing expire? It's kind of handy to have that listed on a template someplace. Is there auto renewal turned on for billing? Sometimes people forget about things like that. Yeah. So this is just some of the info around it. And I don't know, Peter, I know we talked a little bit in our prep meeting about potentially having a template for this. I can really find one that I've used. I've sort of been inconsistent about this. Do we?
Yeah, I have. I need to try to repurpose something, because I have a webmaster owner's manual, but part of the purpose is not only to gather this information, but if you're people like you and I who might want to sell a care program, it's kind of like, okay, here's all the, we're making sure that if somebody developed, this is all the information you need to know, and it's all the things you need to do, and it's also. And it's a lot of work. Here you go. If you need my help, let me know. Yeah. So I want to digest that back down a little bit. And another thing I don't want to forget too is there's two things, and one we'll talk about later. When we're talking about like the things that you need to know in the documentations, you may have, and I know a lot of times this happens in organizations where there might be somebody in a role like an IT manager who may manage some parts of this. So again, understanding the environment and go, okay, no, there's a guy responsible for any kind of our hosting stuff. So get to know that person, and make sure that you're both on the same page as to where one role ends and the other one begins, and so on. And in this list here, and we'll talk about a little bit later in terms of not the passwords yours, but is there a fee, the auto renewal that could go to things like premium themes and premium plugins too. Yeah. So we'll talk about that later, but I just wanted, while it was top of mind.
Okay. So let's start with the first thing, identifying your domain and hosting. So I can keep doing. You want to do the slides, Peter? I can keep advancing until.
Yeah. Until I'll do a quick break and maybe show a couple of these tools if it makes sense to do, or maybe you tell me, Ray, once we get through it, if we want to do it like right after or later on as part of a show and tell. Sure. Yeah, go ahead. So identifying and managing your domain. It might seem pretty simple. Okay, the domain is hartfordwp.com or so on. So that's where the site lives, but how do you manage that? How do you make sure you have all the information on it? And here's the caveat about getting all this information kind of upfront, especially if it becomes your responsibility. Domain recovery can be expensive, lengthy, and even may not be, and even possible. I wrote this incorrectly, but it may not even be possible. And I've seen that. Ray, I don't know if you've seen it, but I've seen it where there's a website and somebody was managing it and they stopped. And nonprofits are good for this, where especially if it's the goodness of your heart, something gets done, somebody leaves, and other people don't even know. They're like, well, we have a website. Next thing you know, your nonprofit, do for good website becomes a furniture, and this happened, a Chinese furniture e-commerce site using the same URL. So there are plenty of folks looking to pounce on domains that become available. So take care of this first. Hopefully you'll have all that information. We're going to keep saying that, hopefully you're going to have this because this is so important, but get access to that domain registrar. Check for the renewal dates, if it's automatic renewal, the things that Ray was just talking about. Keep track of it. Does it renew at a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, or does it renew tomorrow? And you got to act fast. So it's good to know that. If you can't get into the registrar, there are ways to at least start the process of figuring that out. But I tell you, if you get it, and if you find that something is registered to a personal account or to a previous person and all, get in there. You can either transfer that account using the process of the registrars have ways that you can transfer to another person if it's in a personal account. And I would say, don't transfer to a personal account, transfer it to a more generic account so you don't keep running into that same problem. Or in some cases, it's just a matter of changing contact information, but it all depends on kind of how deep and personal something goes. It's like, well, I registered that in my personal account with all my family domains. Well, that has to be transferred. That's not something they're going to just hand over registration. So one of the recommendations in making something a little bit more generic might be using non-domain specific email. Ray's going to talk a little bit later about domain specific emails. And this is actually new advice to me. I hadn't even thought about this, which is, if I have ingersollinteractive.com as my domain, and I'm using that as my contact information, and all of a sudden I lose the domain, I lose the email. So having a different email that you use, and in this case, using something like a Gmail or a yahoo.com email or what, just some separate, even your cox.net or Comcast or whatever, is a way of keeping that available. The nice thing about Gmails, especially if you're in a work environment, is it's easier to make that more shared in a way that isn't so personal, where you're intermixing personal plus business. There are online tools to discover a domain info. I tend to use viewdns.info. I'll probably show that to you in a little bit. Another one is mxtoolbox.com. Similarly, next slide, Ray, is
we had a good comment from Sue in the chat about, she said she sets up all her nonprofits with like name of the nonprofit or the
exactly
at gmail.com. So that's a great idea to keep it separate. And then just some other comments I want to call, like, so Bob had mentioned too about taking over a website where the domain owner had died. And I shared with Peter, I got involved with a nonprofit where it was a similar situation. And fortunately, his widow had enough information, was able to get the login credentials and all that. But that was the first step we did, was moving the domain to the organization. So it's tough. A lot of these, smaller businesses too, it's a 1 or 2 person thing, and one person is running everything. So that's, again, things to remember for the rest of us too, if you're running it.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the same thing. I think anybody who's run, websites for people in an agency or a freelancer, that, a person becoming unavailable because they've passed away, because they've become ill, because they've just kind of gone off the grid, that's a challenge. That really is. And try to getting that information as soon as possible is and working with the people you are now in advance. It's sort of like, this is, part of the insurance policy is, what can we make sure that we, do to maintain this going forward. Something that's really important in terms of the domain is confirm who does have access to the domain. It is possible that there's somebody who has access to the domain who, I don't know, maybe is an employee who is not real happy about what happened. So you kind of want to get on that right away, because especially if you're somebody who's being held responsible for something. But there are, not only can something be registered in another person's name, but there could be collaborators added to it, somebody with delegate access. So just being aware of who can get at your important stuff is really important. If we want to later on, show you kind of an example of like in GoDaddy, where there's delegate access and how you might inherit it, get access and go, oh, who are these people who also have access to my account? I don't know them anymore. You can remove them, those types of things. Review the DNS settings to understand how the domain is used. DNS, domain name servers that set up, what a URL resolves to, and just understanding that there may be things attached to a domain that aren't necessarily immediately, you might not immediately be aware of. Ray's going to talk about email. That's huge. One of the biggest things in transferring or dealing with domain registration is, it is possible to take down an email system and make a lot of people really unhappy. So that's it's something to be aware of what's happening in emails, especially if you're in a company. Private, obviously you're closer to it. One of the things that I talk to when I'm working with my clients is I always encourage hosting email separate from web host. Even though a lot of web hosts say, oh, we can host your email too, there's a lot of reasons why you would want to keep those separate. But that's all managed in DNS. There may also be subdomains that are being used that you just have to know. I didn't know that there was this other site out there that was specialized for some subset of maybe customers or all. Those are all things you might find in your DNS settings, where you can say, oh, what here's a website I never knew existed, and it happens. It really does. So then you also want to know which DNS are you using. Cloudflare might be used if using, if there's a CDN in place where you're having all that managed through another service. Are you managing it at the web host? Are you managing it at the registrar? So you kind of need to know all that to make sure you know how everything is being directed. And also, you can, once you get into if it is like a business account, you see a number of things. You can also see if there's other domains registered. Sometimes it's a redirect. Sometimes it's, oh, we grabbed the .org, the .com, the .net. We want to protect it. And you just want to know how those are being used. And getting access to the registrar and the DNS settings will give you a lot of information on that. Ray, anything you want to add to that?
No, the last one's a good one. That makes me chuckle too, of another nonprofit I worked with, where they were claiming every 3-letter domain after, are you using these things? They're like, no, we just want to make sure. I go, whatever, you're paying for them, because that's the thing. They didn't realize it. So.
Well, and that's another thing, right? Exactly. They'll go, how come this bill is so high? And you look at it, you go, you just, maybe you want to protect it. Do you really? It's yet another thing to audit and review. That's kind of like this auditing and assessing, what do we need to do? Somebody previously may have done it a certain way and it became, either habit or forgotten or whatever, and you may look at things a little bit differently. So we're looking at the web hosting, very big topic, but again, hopefully you'll have access to your web host. Again, the same type of thing, try to get that information right away, checking for the renewal date. This is kind of the same information. Are we on automatic renewal? Who's paying the bill? How's the billing working? Is it paid by a company? Is it paid by a person? If that person stops their card, your website goes down or the hosting gets turned off. So, getting access to that, if it's actually something you're inheriting, or at least knowing who's responsible, are things in place? Are we all set, or is it something you have to kind of take care of right out of the gate? And again, if necessary, transferring or changing that contact info depending on the host, the web host. Different web hosts have different ways that they manage their accounts, so it's hard to kind of give a blanket, here's how to do it. They'll help you, because obviously a web host is going to want to make sure that they keep their customers. It's getting that recurring revenue is very important to them, so they will work with you to make sure that the right people are on it. But you may have to do things. You may have to prove a certain level of ownership. You may have to put code on in your DNS or some level of proof of who you are. That's why the registration, if you lose the registrar and you have to prove who you are in a company, that could take months, if ever done, because it's difficult because obviously nobody wants anyone to steal the stuff, so they protect it. There are online tools to help identify your hosting. Again, the View DNS Info will help if you're not sure, kind of like hosting checker. Hey, who's hosting my site? So that you get a way of, if you're not sure, if nobody's passed that on, you go, okay, I got to do some forensics on this. There are some ways to do that. Ray, any hosting nightmare stories?
No, I mean, I think some of this just brings to mind too that I know a lot of people have inherited sites that maybe somebody's still, they developed the site and the developer is also the person doing the hosting. Yep. So that's one of those deals too. You can find that out a little bit sometimes when you start asking for access. That goes back to my thing about the contact. And I did have a situation like this too with, I think it was, I'm not sure if it was a nonprofit or if it was a for-profit, but it was one of those where all of a sudden I got involved because their previous developer had kind of fallen off the face of the earth.
Yep.
And then once I came on and started asking for cPanel access and this and that, it came to light that, oh, wait a minute, this person was, hosting on their own servers and all that. So I think it's just a good thing to keep in mind. Again, it's, most website developers they want happy clients. They don't want to keep your website hostage. But if you are working with somebody, it's good to have a good plan in place to say, okay, when you hand this thing over to me, or what happens if I do want to move to a different developer hosting in the future, how easy will that be to do? So that, again, back to this idea of separation. Yes, it makes things a little bit more complicated in terms of setting up. But the reason for that is we'll talk about a couple times, it's that flexibility. And you're not stuck in one platform. That's the whole beauty about WordPress. It's that flexibility. So.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, this idea of, and it's less and less as time goes on. So if you go to the next slide, I think I'm going to even talk a little bit about some of this. The idea that the hosting could be, years ago, there was a lot of very personal, small, box under a desk type of web hosting, or a lot of reseller hosting can be a royal pain in the neck. When somebody's acting as a reseller and then you're moving it and you're like, hey, we want to take you out of the formula, and they're like, oh no, you have to pay me more money, or it can get unpleasant at times. Instead of just an amicable, there are folks who are going to try to hold on to that even if they're just a reseller. So getting control of that sooner rather than later is pretty important. So while you're doing all of this and you're looking at the hosting and go, hey, is this personal hosting? Is this Jack Shoreline hosting, or is it WP Engine or Kinsta or Flywheel, or some of the ones that we kind of like. I'm a big Cloudways person right now, but check to see. It's your opportunity now to look to see if things have changed, and now you're looking at it and going, check if the hosting is high quality, fairly priced, and appropriate for what you're doing. Maybe it's too small, maybe it's too big, maybe you're paying too much. I've seen hosting where it's like you are way overpaying for what you need and for the traffic that you're getting, for the complexity of your site. You just don't need to spend that. So it's an opportunity to look at that. And that's kind of the comment I was saying about the host might be an earlier generation forgotten. Like, I don't know, so this guy has always been hosting our site. So it's a chance to look at that. Confirm what services are included or available to you through your hosting. You might have great hosting that gives you, managed hosting, staging, backups, and security. And that's going to give you an idea what you need to do going forward with the site in terms of, host backups and security. And oh, great! Now, boy, if you inherit a site that you can easily set up a staging site and test some of the changes you can do to fix, that's really helpful, because now you feel you've got a comfort zone where you can make those changes. And then there's in that, looking at, now you're looking at the host and all with fresh eyes. Test the site for speed, mobile responsiveness. Are you on a good host for your website? And tools that we would use for that are GTmetrix, PageSpeedWeb.dev, the Lighthouse tester in the Chrome Inspector. I think that all of them in Inspect have some version of that at this point, if it's a Chromium browser. But bottom line is it may be a good time to consider a new web host just because, new fresh eyes. It's an opportunity to examine everything, and because you're going to be doing that anyway, and you might say, we could do better with our hosting.
I kind of laughed at your first one there about, hosting might be from an earlier generation, forgotten. So yeah, I've worked with a couple of clients where, again, this goes back to the whole thing about understanding the history of the site. If a site's been around for a long time, maybe 7-8 years ago, there were less options, especially for WordPress. I think now the WordPress space for hosting is so much better, so much more competitive. There's just, so many great options out there where, 8-9 years ago, if a site's been around for that long, I see a lot of those sites that are like network solutions. And those are the ones where you look at, you're like, they're nickel and diming you for everything. It's not even like the best kind of, access or anything. And I get to those, I'm like, oh boy, number one thing is, let's start looking for some new hosting here if possible.
Yeah. No, 100%. That is exactly what I think we run into. It's the network solutions, or it's the, Charlie's reseller company, or those types of things. Checking the clock. Do you want to spend a little? Do you want me to show?
Do a quick, do a little bit. If you don't mind. Do some.
No, not at all.
Cool.
The thing that takes me the longest time is find the window where I'm going to go share screen. There we go. Share. Perfect. And let me see. So here, I assume you can see it.
Yep.
This is view DNS.info. And here's a place where you can put in, you've got all these little boxes that you can use to really start kind of checking your site. And one of the first ones you might go to is the IP who is, the domain IP who is. So say we were looking up, actually our site, the build.hartfordwp.com. And this is where you can go right into and kind of get this information. Now, what the hosting that we have, one of the things that makes it a little bit of a challenge is that it's set up as the privacy of the information on who it's being registered to. But there are ways of finding out, by something like, well, who's Two Cows is one of the companies. If you're looking to see, who's hosting it, the registrar gives you a hint that hover.com, this website is done through Hover. So in looking at the clues here, you're going to be, okay, I'm hosted, the registrar is Hover, and the DNS information for this might be, if I go to a different thing here, build.hartford. So this big old tool, I think this is the one. There's the IP address that it gives me. Here's one thing that gets kind of interesting. So that's the IP address. That's the A record on that. I can get all of the records. I just have to remember where some of this stuff is. One thing that's kind of interesting is if you have a web host and you're kind of curious, if you do a reverse IP address lookup, you can see all of the other sites hosted at that IP address. This is kind of interesting, especially if you were taking over a site, because you may find that you are not only sharing your site with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of websites, and I've seen that. But maybe websites you don't want to be associated with. Now, it gets a little complicated nowadays, the way hosting works with IP addresses and all, but at least being aware of, some of these types of things are kind of important. So a tool like View DNS gives you a lot of information. Now, another thing we could look at is, some of these websites like the hosting checker I kind of like. So if I was to look up the same one, build.hartfordwp.com, that's our sample site, and do a search. Oh, it thinks I'm a bot, so let's try a different one, because I've already done this search just a little while ago. Let's try this one. This is the digital.com, and it's in our slides. So this gives me some information that it's the hosting provider is DigitalOcean, and the information that goes with it. Now, what's interesting about this is DigitalOcean is sort of the server owner. The other tool gave me the fact that I was using DigitalOcean through Cloudways. I didn't think so. You may have to use multiple tools, but this idea that there are these website tools that gives you some information about what's happening on the back end that when you're doing those forensics. I'm going to show you in GoDaddy. Here's an example of if you were to go into probably didn't want to do my product, but so account settings. Here's an example where if they're hosted with GoDaddy, there might be a delegate account where you're going to see, I actually have access to some customers, but people who can access my account. You want to look at that column. You want to see, and this I'm just showing this as pending. I set up a blank one. You might want to cancel it. You can delete it and all, and if you don't know who these people are. So kind of knowing who has access to your information is really important. Real quick, here's another registrar that I use. I'm just going to show you in the DNS information if you have access to the registrar, and I'm going to bring up Hartford. And this is going to give me, that first level of information. Okay, when was it registered? When is it going to be renewed? What's my price? So this is hover.com. This is a favorite registrar of mine. DNS information. Now this is where we're going to see, okay, I've got a website, but I also have subdomains build, the one we're working on, something called FSE that I built, Gutenberg one and all. So this getting access to these records gives you a lot of information that you want to pay attention to. And we can come back to some of this later, but that's sort of like, again, this is forensics accounting. This is going back in and trying to kind of rebuild and restructure, but using some of these tools. And then obviously the speed tools that we've shown before to give you an idea of the type of speed that you have going on your website, and things that you can use. Ray, anything you want to add to that? Or
no, that's good. Yeah, I've used a couple of those tools in the past, and now that plugin that you sold me on, Peter, the one that also has a lot of that built in now to it too, shows you quickly on the hosting thing. So
yeah, great,
cool. All right, let me grab the screen back.
Grab the screen.
Yep.
If there's any questions while everybody's doing that, you want to drop in the chat or raise your hand. I don't think we're good.
All right, so let's talk about getting away from the website again for a second. Let's talk about email accounts. That's another key aspect, I think, is you're taking over ownership of a website. It's understanding and managing email accounts. So just like everything else we've been talking about, first off, it starts with identifying how many email accounts exist. So ideally, if you know all the email accounts that exist, you want to just go through each one of them and say, what's the purpose? Who's using it? Is it still needed or not? I'll talk a little bit later about getting rid of accounts. So just, again, trying to get inventory of those. And from an account standpoint, there's probably two types, at least, that you want to be aware of. Sometimes you see these mixed to make things a little bit more confusing, but you'll encounter either a domain-specific email, so that's username at whatever xyz.org or .com or etc. So that's an email account that's directly associated with the domains that Peter was talking about, or the website. Or sometimes there's public ones that are out there, user or something at gmail.com. Those are a little bit tougher, so I won't spend as much time talking about those and kind of what you can do with those, because again, that can be a little bit harder to get access to if somebody's been using their own personal email account. trying to wrestle control that back, that's a whole separate topic. So like I said, I'll talk more about the domain specific email accounts. So again, I like the forensic idea. You want to start with, where are they being managed? So those email accounts, you can create email accounts many different ways. You can create them through, as Peter said, your website hosting. A lot of websites, Bluehost, SiteGround, etc. They offer you that ability to create email accounts, which sounds great. In some cases, I'm mixed. I think sometimes it's fine, if it's just there's one account that's being created and there's no need to go out and spend extra money. We'll talk about paid services later. But it varies depending on how you can manage those. So one of the first things, this is step 2, you first want to find out the hosting company, and based on that, they want to reach out to the hosting company to say, okay, how do I, if I realize that the email was created on the hosting, how can I get access to that? How can I manage it? And I'll show a couple of different ways that you're probably likely to see those email accounts. In the past, it was quite often through cPanel. cPanel is something that your website hosting would provide you. There'd be many tools in cPanel. We'll look at that a little bit in a second. Or these days, a lot of hosting are going away from cPanel, so they've created their own kind of management dashboards. So I'll show you an example of that later. But if it's not through the website host, if it's on a paid service, it gets a little bit more complicated. If it's Office 365, so that's Microsoft, Google, Google Workspace, formerly G Suite. There's another layer of questions like, was that purchased directly? So was that set up directly through Office 365 and Google, or was it an add-on through some hosting? So GoDaddy, I'll show an example of that later, and other hosts, in their defense, they want to make it easy for people to set up an account. So if you want to set up Gmail or Office 365, they'll sell it to you as an add-on, as a product. But that means now you don't have direct access to that. So you have to work through GoDaddy, through your hosting. So in some ways, it's kind of like getting it through your website host, but there is a bit of separation there. So exactly, yeah, GoDaddy is the one I mentioned, but there's other hosts that do that as well. So if you're using, let's say, this is probably the most common thing in the past, then you still see it quite a bit, especially on, I think Bluehost may still use this, HostGator certainly does. So if you go to your cPanel, there's a whole set of tools in here in cPanel, but in general, you'll find somewhere in there, you'll find something for email. So it may or may not look exactly like this, but you'll find some icons here for setting up your email accounts, forwarding, encryption, et cetera, et cetera. So the one you probably want to start with, obviously, is clicking on email accounts, and it should show you something kind of like this. This is just a snippet of it, but each email account that was created on this host through cPanel will be listed individually. You'll get to see things like storage usage, so how much storage has been allocated. And again, obviously it's a slide, so I can't show it to you, but here is where you can start managing things. So you can start, removing it. You can check emails quite often. Quite often for emails that are created through a host, there's a web host component to this. So you can see things like, what's the one, like squirrel mail, I think. Just the name cracks me up. So there's different ways you can actually view what's going on in those emails, and we'll talk a little bit later about why you might want to do that. So again, this is cPanel for some older hosting. A lot of newer hosting, they've gone to their own custom, custom dashboards and custom accounts. So this is what it looks like for SiteGround. I still use SiteGround for my own hosting. So, in SiteGround for your website host, you'll have something on the left, you have something like email. It's pretty much the same thing you would see on cPanel, but a little bit less. They've kind of reduced the control of what you can do. But the process is basically the same. You can create them here, you can change passwords, etc. So, and then, as I said, for other ones like GoDaddy, for example, I don't even have an example. I couldn't find an example of somebody using it for their email, but this is typically what you'll see. So back to what Peter said about starting off with the domain. If you look at your domain, you want to look at your billing, or the billing of who's been paying for the domain, and see what products have been added on. Typically, email will be a product that they charge you for every month. So if you look at, here's Office 365 through GoDaddy, they charge, $2 per user per month. So that's per account per month, et cetera, up to a premium thing. So that you'll have to work with your host to say, how do I get access to that? If I want to remove email accounts or I want to add new ones, you probably do it through the GoDaddy interface. And again, you want to reach out to your provider to understand that a bit.
Yeah, Ray, real quick on that.
Sure.
One of the things that you can also find out when you inherit something, and now you find, this happens, I think, a lot with the small to medium businesses and nonprofits, not the larger organizations that have an IT person or all, and then kind of that person is responsible for all these things. You may go into one of these tools, or another one that I've used is Rackspace, and Rackspace is a reseller. That Office 365 kind of thing, do you go directly or through them? But what you may find is when you go there, you go, we're paying for emails that don't exist. That person left the company last year and nobody went in to change that. And that can add up. If you're a small business or nonprofit, all of a sudden you realize that you're paying way more for email hosting that isn't needed because the person isn't there anymore. And this is, again, another opportunity when you're doing your audit on your, hey, I've just kind of
you
inherited
brought up a good topic that I kind of forgot to include a slide on, which is, this goes back to, again, when you inherit things, you know, part of the process is understanding what you have, but ideally you want to improve what you have over time. And I've kind of learned the hard lesson and talked to clients through my hard learned lessons around, you know, that idea of how many email accounts do you really need? You know, I've had some clients where, you know, their first instinct was to give every person, even in a nonprofit, we want to give, you know, Joe at nonprofit.org his own email, and Bob at nonprofit.org, et cetera, et cetera. And I've had to explain to them what happens when Bob, you know, Bob leaves or Joe leaves. It's like, you want the minimum amount to do what you want to do. And everyone with an email account, with a business email or nonprofit email, you know, the thing I think I want to remind people is when they do send out communications, whether you like it or not, they're representing your organization. So you know, how many people do you trust with your .com or .org emails? And I think that helps people understand, yeah, there's a cost benefit, you know, cost to this, but also the maintenance and risk, I think, of having multiple email accounts out there.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is the final one too. So if you purchase it directly from Google or Office 365, I don't have an example of that, it's a bit more complicated because email in this case is really, you know, Google Workspace, formerly called Google Suite. There's a lot of things you get per user. So what you're really doing is in Google, you're setting up through Workspace is what they call it now. You're setting up users, and users have different services associated to them. So for example, Google Drives, you know, Google Docs, things like that, and Gmail. Gmail is just one of those services on there. So this is probably, if someone has set this up, it might have been an IT person who did this, you know, or there's a little different skill set, I think, to set this up than there is some of those other ones we looked at. So again, you may or may not have this. If you do, there's plenty of documents out there in YouTube videos showing you like how to set up a Google Workspace or how to manage that. So I'd say look into that. So again, real quickly, so you know, other kind of broader things you want to look at too are any rules associated with those accounts. So as you remember in cPanel and also that custom dashboard I showed you, there are other things you can do like email forwarding. So you know, for example, somebody may have set up a info at whatever xyz.org, but it all forwards to bob at gmail.com. So you want to take a look at those email rules and see, are they still appropriate? Autoresponders. So people may have set up an autoresponder, in which case it just always replies something back. And, you know, is that appropriate or not? Maybe it replies back to somebody's phone number and you want to change that. So a key thing too is as you're going through cleaning things up, before you remove anything, make sure you understand what's there. So this is tedious. There's no getting around it. It's tedious. If people haven't been keeping up with either inbox zero or just maintaining their emails, you want to at least take a look and understand what's there. So that's where I go back to. If it's a web hosted email, it's pretty easy to get those web hosted you know, email things like squirrel mail, whatever. You can look at the inboxes and decide what you want to keep or not.
Yeah.
You know, save or forward any emails that need to be retained. And then the final thing on this too, if you're getting rid of accounts, you want to make sure that you clean it up wherever those other emails are referenced. So maybe on the website, there were contact forms that used to send things to these different emails. Maybe in the headers or footers, those emails are referenced. So, you know, as you're removing things, which is fine, just make sure you've accounted for other places where those email accounts may publicly be listed.
Yeah, Ray, in the chat, apropos to this was discussion, Sue and Bob, but the idea of like, you know, and I chimed in on the partially with the classic it depends, but you know, how do you handle emails that you're now in effect turning off? And in some cases, you know, do you forward them to somebody? Do you put them like in for me personally, there was some cases where it went to there's sort of a default email box. You just have to monitor it. But then I would say if there's somebody who, is a salesperson who manages a lot of accounts directly, you've got to treat that differently. And that might, what gets transitioned to the person who replaces it. So, there's a lot of making sure that, understanding how that email affects your business and all before making some of the decisions about turning stuff off.
Yeah.
Another point real quick, and then I'll hand it back to you, is also monitoring what's in an email box, and then again understanding how things are being used. I have someone I know who has an email box where the box is under domain, but he prefers to use Gmail, but they're not using the Gmail, I want to say suite, but the G Suite services. But so the domain forwards to a Gmail account, but are retained in that domain on the server. And there's lots of large files over years and all of a sudden 25 gigs, and he's going, I'm not getting any emails. Yeah. And again, you back up and go, well, because nothing has ever been deleted off of your email server, right, even though you're dealing with it over in your Gmail account. So again, understanding how things are being used before.
Yeah, and the whole, my 2 seconds on what to do about, deleting people's accounts and all that. It's tough because a lot of that goes back to policies, and most people, again, it depends on the organization. Is there a good written policy? And as we've known, and don't want to open up any political debates about emails and servers and things like that, but that's kind of, even though there's a policy, plenty of people mix emails. So it's one of those that, yeah, you're at that point of, if you're inherited things, I'd say you're going to have to speak to the greater organization or for the business owner to decide, what do you do? And ideally, there's a policy or something you can refer back to. So yeah, my advice is I'm not a lawyer, so don't delete things, but just be aware of it as you're cleaning things up.
Yeah, nor am I. Our disclaimer: we're not lawyers.
Our caveats. Yeah. All right, let's go to WordPress. I think we're gonna have quite a bit here. So, oops, sorry, WordPress settings.
Yeah, if you walk through these for me, and then we can again decide how. I'll try to go. A lot of this is review from many of our previous meetups. So it's all of the things that you do when you're an admin and you go in there and you got to look at a site and kind of assess. Right, so you're auditing, you're assessing, you want to notate, you want to clean as much as you can. So you got to get in there, roll up your sleeves, and start working on it. So, and the first thing is, and kind of mentioned this a few times, can you log in the first place? Log in with known or new admin account information. If there's issues and going, well, I know the username, but you may have to do a password recovery if there hasn't been as clean a transition as you would have liked, or you have a new account set up for you. If you have access to that email address and do a forgot my password kind of thing as a way of getting in there and then kind of cleaning things up. If you can't do that, there are ways going through the back-end database where you can kind of manage some users. I don't know, Ray, if that ties into anything that you're going to talk about with some of the other stuff, but that gets into a level of technical, but everything's driven by tables, so there are ways. I think the message here is don't panic, but take care of it as quickly as possible. And as per something I saw in I think, Sue, you put this, but once you get in, back up that site and download an off-site copy of it kind of right away, just because you want to make sure that no matter what happens from that point on, including maybe there's a bad operator who still has access and does something or whatever, you've grabbed a copy of the site. So that would be an important thing to do. And then, just jump right into things like, check the site health and say, what's the heartbeat of this site per the WordPress tools? And associated with that is, again, we'll talk about it, but, you'll see what needs to be updated and things like that. But, kind of want to get in there, grab a copy, start checking the heartbeat of the site. All right, so then what you'll probably want to do is, maybe go right to the settings tab. As admin, you've got access to the settings, and just, let's make sure that the admin email address is correct, because if something goes on with the site, it's going to send info to the admin, and you're now the admin. You want to make sure it goes to you. It's just, there's simple things we'll walk through real quick. Little things like, it's again all of the things, right? So are the reading settings correct? In other words, search engine visibility. I've seen this happen where people don't realize that their site's not being indexed because they didn't uncheck a certain box and all. And just those things that you would look at as you're going through and auditing a site that you are now, assessing for, those things you need going forward. Start checking for the extras. Just what all of a sudden and I've seen this, you look and go, my list of things in my admin toolbar, my left side navigation is overwhelming. There's all these things in there. Well, you may have all this functionality added by plugins and stuff, and that's kind of your first clue. How come my interface doesn't look like my other website, or what I see in tutorials and things like that? So you're going to start assessing the types of things that you see when you go to the site. Next slide. Yep. So confirming WordPress users, make sure if you're the admin that you're properly set up as the admin, that the accounts are being set up in such a way that you have the access that you need, that you're not relying on a previous account that somebody else might still have access to. Change, add a new account, change passwords, remove or demote any unfamiliar user accounts. What we're saying is you go in there, and again, sites that have been around for a while, even if it's your own, you start realizing that you haven't recently looked at the list of users. And there could be a whole lot of reasons why you might have, editors and admins that you don't want to have. I don't know who this person is, and they have access to your site technically. I mean, it could even be, heaven forbid, but the hacking and the malware and things. So this is your opportunity to really kind of assess and go, I'm the admin. This is what you might have another access to admin, but you want to limit those accounts. So if you're unsure, if you can't just delete a user, change them to subscriber. If somebody has all of a sudden that you didn't know had access to the site and needs it, well, they'll let you know. They'll go, hey, I log in, now I can't do anything. What happened? Oh, are you an editor? Now you have an opportunity. So instead of err on the side of caution at that point, and then you can manage that. But instead of purely deleting user accounts, you can certainly demote those accounts. And then check to see if there are developer accounts that are needed or not. There may be somebody else who's an admin of the account that might necessarily need that role. You should look into that. If you don't know who they are because that information hasn't been passed to you, you can demote them, check their email address, email that and say, yeah, man, I'm taking over the website. Do you have any current involvement? At least you have an opportunity to start that conversation. So again, managing that user list is really, really important.
Peter, I don't know if you mentioned this, or maybe if we'll have time to demo this or not, but so when you do remove a user, one of the nice options that WordPress does give you is the ability to attribute the content to somebody else. So again, if you're really getting rid of somebody, you don't want to lose all their posts and everything else. And so I'm not sure when they add that into WordPress, maybe like somewhere, I don't know exactly when, but that's a nice thing. So you don't lose everything. So yes, attribute it to this active admin instead, and sort of keep everything. So
yeah. No, that's a good point. And there are ways, if you say you wanted to keep somebody who's no longer with the organization, but you wanted to keep them as an author, then you edit their account to a different email address, a different password, but it's still there. So there are ways that you can still keep that, but you're absolutely right. The deletion of a user account, you have that opportunity to say, okay, what do you want me to do with any information attributed to them? Definitely. So as we're looking through our admin options, review your WordPress theme. This is again an area that you see kind of gets it's either been abused or forgotten. So the very first thing is to at least know what's going on. So you go to appearances, themes, check to see what theme is active. If there are themes that are there that are not active, you're pretty safe. You can delete them. You can remove them. Removing a theme that's not active, right? So it's not doing anything other than not only taking space, but it has code sitting, idly by. The one thing you might, that you might want to do, it's generally recommended, is at least leave an inactive default theme. The default themes that come with WordPress, like right now it's 2022. Sometimes I leave 2020 on because it's there. Have I ever needed to use it? No, but if all of a sudden the theme that you have updates and something goes a little wonky, your other theme at least allows you to kind of manage your site through that until you get your main theme working. So having an active theme and a default theme in place. But if you have, and we've probably all seen it, dozens and dozens of, oh, they tried all of these themes and never used them or didn't like them, and they sit in the server, remove them if you don't need it. Then you need to, looking at your current theme, see if it's outdated. Does it need to be updated, or is it literally outdated in that it hasn't been updated for years, and now it might be an opportunity to say, hey, we gotta think about either a redesign or redo the site using a more modern theme, block-based theme that not block-based theme, but a theme that uses the blocks in the core editor and all, to kind of rebuild the pages. But at least you want to know, like, and I've again running this experience and gone, this theme it's running on hasn't been updated in 7 years. Probably want to update it. So, and then you also want to familiar yourself with the type of theme and any dependencies, and that includes the premium. Is it a premium theme? Who's paying for it? Premium plugins, are they being paid for? Are they necessary? Is there page builders involved? Are there page builders baked in, right? If somebody went to Theme Forest and bought a theme and it had all of this stuff, and now you're going, what is all of this junk? Well, it may have been of the era of, go to a service where you had these deliver it all themes that now you're like, I don't need it and it's causing problems, but at least make sure that you have an understanding of what your theme is and how it works.
Yeah, I get 2 words for that: visual composer. That's
exactly.
Exactly. Do you
WP
see that?
Bakery, yeah. Visual Composer, WP Bakery, site origin. Anyway, yeah. So at the very least to know. Then similarly, reviewing those plugins, go to the plugin section, check for inactive and outdated plugins, update plugins that are active that need to be updated. Again, you've made a backup. Hopefully you're using, your host is doing a backup, you pulled one. If you're using backup tools that allow you to do kind of incremental backups or just backup like the plugins to the database, I use Backup Buddy for stuff like that, and it allows me to kind of be granular on my backups. You generally safe of deleting inactive plugins. If it's inactive, it's not being used, it's again, it's code sitting there. Look for multiple plugins that do the same thing, whether active or inactive. And you'll find that you'll go, oh my gosh, this website has 4 slider plugins and might need none of them, especially now with some of the newer options and all. And sliders are notorious for doing things to your site. So, look for those types of things, or somebody tried, again, different things and didn't turn off and didn't delete and just kind of left it there because, they didn't know better, didn't think about it. So it'd be really important to look at that. One of the things to do is, take some time and consider deactivating the plugins and check and activate what's needed. In other words, go through, deactivate, look at your site going, especially if you could do the whole list of plugins or the ones that are suspect and go, I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to deactivate it. And then I'm going to see what the impact on the site is. And if you can't find an impact, you may have a candidate leave it deactivated. And if after a while there's no issues, you can delete that. You may have active plugins that are doing nothing other than acting, quite honestly, potentially as a risk to code, especially if it's something that has been outdated. And check to see if you have plugins. So you can go through your plugins and go through, view the details of it and go, oh, this plugin hasn't been updated in 4 years. You may want to consider, do I need it, or is there a better replacement for it? So, that exercise, somebody who had that site before just kind of ignored some of these things over time. It's not unusual. And now you're looking at it and going, we're kind of at risk because of these kind of issues. And one little tip here is this: there's a plugin notes plugin that I like for some of these, where it gives you just a little opportunity to add notes to your plugins to say, what does this plugin do? If you're doing this, and you can delete it afterwards if all, but if you're adding a plugin, you can put a little note that says why you added the plugin. You can keep track of things right in the WordPress dashboard. Or if you're doing your testing, you know, okay, this is used on my events page or something like that. So this plugin notes plugin is a neat way to annotate right in WordPress you know, how your plugins work. You can keep notes on things. What's our next slide?
Here's the demo. The only thing I want to add, I guess, a little bit,
Yeah.
Peter, back to plugins is around paid plugins specifically. So
Yeah.
again, it's understanding what paid plugins you have, and if maybe a beginner question might be, how do I know if it's a paid plugin or not? Generally, a paid plugin will have a license key someplace. So you go to properties of the plugin, it'll say, you know, this key requires a license. Some plugins will also, if you try to update them, they won't let you update it if the license is expired. That's another, you know, giveaway that it's a paid plugin. So for those paid plugins, that's where you've got to unfortunately do more research. And there's a lot of research involved here tonight, but you know, you need to understand what is the cost of that plugin. You know, who owns the license? That's a key thing. A lot of times there's a handover where a developer maybe was using their own license for something, and now, you know, they're gone and they've turned off activation for it. So now you need to actually purchase this, maybe an unaccounted for cost of maintaining the website. You know, so if you want to get updates to this plugin going forward, and you generally do, you want to get security updates, things like that, somebody needs to pay for it. So that might be a time too to start revisiting, understanding those plugins to say, hey, maybe there's a free thing now that does what this paid thing used to do. Forms are probably a notorious one where maybe you're paying a Gravity Forms license for a simple contact form. We've talked in our previous talks about some form plugins that, you know, Peter and I both think are very good free form plugins. So maybe there's a better thing out there now. So, you know, again, more research work, but at least try to understand what's paid versus what's free. Demo. Let me stop my share.
Yep. So let me grab the screen. Share screen 2. So what this is I'm already logged in. So we'll take the whole logging in part out of the picture, because, you know, once you get past that point where you're either recovering and all that once you get logged in, the types of things you're going to look at. So this is where I was looking at, you know, that standard stuff. Okay, so the site health status. So right now, this particular site, and this is a copy of our pet adoption site, the animal shelter site. You know, I got a good hint right off the bat that the site health is good. I can go under Tools, Site Health, or click the link that's in if your dashboard shows this. So if I go Tools, Site Health. And one of the things that you might want to, you know, you might see red flags, things going on, especially if you're dealing with old hosts. And so, for example, you may find that the you know, the PHP versions or things like that are out of date. So those are the types of things that touch on your hosting and all. So this site health section under Tools will give you when you're doing an assessment of your web host and kind of the overall status of things and what's updated and what's not updated. This is a good place to start for that. So use that site health tool. I mentioned going under settings and general settings. You know, make sure under administration email settings that you've got the proper email address there. That's the one, you know, that there's a problem with WordPress. If something crashes that you get, thank goodness we don't get the white screen of death nearly as much. We get the email that says, hey, you know, there's a problem with your site. You get that updated. And just FYI, if you change that date, make sure that the person is, if it's you, knows that you have to go in and accept the change. I've seen that where the change of email address for admin is never accepted by the email account. So that, and you'll see a message in that says, hey, this is not actually moved over yet. You know, check your little things, like is your time zone, the things that get missed. This is an opportunity to excuse me, look at things like those types of things. When I was looking at, I mentioned the reading and discouraging, search engine visibility, discourage search engines from indexing that site. You typically want that turned off, right? You want, sites to be indexed, but there may be reason. And, go through kind of all of these and just get an idea of what's going on. And you'll see that this is when I talk about what gets added. There's block visibility and Kadence blocks are things added to my settings based on plugins that are there. So, you kind of want to look at that. I mentioned you look at the users. I added a bunch of users. So when you're looking at your user count, the first thing you want to do is just filter things easily. Go up to the top of the screen, administrator, and you go, there's 4 administrators here. Do I want, I don't know. Oh, Bernice was the person who left. I definitely know that that person doesn't need to be on the list, but now I have 3 administrators, but maybe here's somebody I'm not sure if that person needs, they still work here. Jamie still works here. So you might want to edit that account and change that account. I want to edit to, even just subscriber. So you're not deleting that account. But, I've seen you come in here to the list of users and you find all kinds of, I don't know who these people are, these editor subscribers. Again, you can filter, you can grab a whole bunch. If you're just not sure, you've got a bunch of editors, you can do bulk changes. So if I wanted to take all my editors and because I didn't know who they are, select them all and change all of their roles again to say subscriber, just because I don't have any editors, maybe for example. So now that changes. So managing those users, getting rid of the ones that you definitely know are not there, demoting those that you're not sure about. If some of these, if Keon says, hey, I'm an editor, well, now you can have a conversation with that person. Better safe than sorry at this point is kind of my philosophy. Appearance, themes, here's a great example of oh, wait a minute, our active theme is Kadence. Here's a bunch of other ones. Well, maybe Astra was tried, you click on it, you can delete it. So when you click on the information on the theme and it opens up, if it's inactive, you can delete it. If it's active, you can't delete it. You can make it inactive and all. But go through all that, and you might leave either 2020 or 2022. So then the only ones I have here are Kadence in 2022. Now, of course, another thing here is to look at the fact that Kadence needs an update. You might find something wildly out of date, and again, check your backups, make sure you have it, because something is really out of date. You want to be a little cautious about how the update and making sure that you have a fallback, a way of doing things. So now you've gone through that process of cleaning up your themes. Plugins, similarly, this is an example showing things that are outdated, inactive that I might need. Oh, I got Yoast SEO and I've got SEO Press running. Yoast is not active. Well, I don't need it there. I can get rid of that. I know that that's not active. Reusable blocks extended. Maybe it's something that somebody uses a search and replace and just turns it on and off as they need it. You can just deactivate it. Going in here and managing, looking at things like, oh, wait a minute, Classic Editor is activated. Here's a quick one. I'll show you. So Classic Editor is active, as is the block editor. We're using Gutenberg on this site. If I go to my pages, for example, and look at all my pages, and because the settings on it are set to allow either or, you'll see in your list of pages, okay, that uses a block editor, that uses a block editor. You go through it and go, nothing is using the Classic Editor. So your first step might go to plugins and then deactivate it. Then you might want to, this is where, again, keep your notes and say, I'm going to deactivate it and see what the impact is. You don't have to delete it right away, but at least deactivate it and say, oh, we missed that. That's being used over here, over there. So this gives you an opportunity to, ease out of things. It doesn't always have to be an all or nothing kind of thing. Obvious ones, yes. Making sure that that plugins are updated is important. Viewing the details to say, well, what is this exactly? I'm not even sure what advanced custom fields are. And then you find out, like, looking at the information, oh, this creates a custom post type and all, and then you realize, oh, we're using it because we created this in our demo site, a custom post type called pets. So we definitely need advanced custom fields. If I deactivated it to test it and I went to use my site, all of a sudden go, oh, my listing of pets, none of that works anymore. That could be included. Go in there and reactivate it. You see it go, okay, I see now the connection between advanced custom fields and something that's on my site. So you have to, be able to spend some time on the site. If you could do this on a staging server, just so you feel comfortable, just to kind of poke at it, that's awesome. If you can offload it to your own, a different site to play with it, just to make sure, that's great. If you got old stuff that's kind of hanging on the edge, you try to take care of it as quickly as you can. Ray, am I missing anything or anything you want to?
No, I guess my piece of advice, especially beginners, we have a lot of beginners, I think, sometimes on these meetings, is I know people are afraid to deactivate things. So I would say reach out to us too, through the Facebook group, or we could always try to help out a bit here on these calls and have a little bit of time to look at things like that, because sometimes it can be tricky, even for people who have been working on sites for a while, because some of these plugins, like advanced custom fields is a good example, that may not always be visible to people right away, because maybe the custom field is really used somewhere further down the line, or it's not, it's not visible, but it's like in a meta box somewhere, where you fill in some information, or, things like I'm working on a site that has like facet, facet WP, which is an indexing thing that you may, it may not be apparent to the eye right away. So again, best advice is, deactivate, don't delete right away. And if you have questions about something, say, hey, I don't know what this plugin really does, that's where our public Facebook, our private Facebook group, I should say, is a great place. We can help you, hopefully help answer that for you.
Yeah, and we kind of missed that at the beginning, the idea of being, if you've inherited a site and you're going, I don't know anything about WordPress, welcome to our group. We're happy to help. While you were talking, I did load that plugin notes plugin, which now when you look at your list of plugins, we have this extra column, and now you can say, okay, under ACF, you might say used for pets custom post type. And then that just kind of goes along. So now you have a record of the notes. So that's a neat little thing, especially if you're doing assessment, you're kind of just managing everything, or you put something in that has one small purpose and you want to make sure you don't forget it or it gets passed on to somebody else. So plugin notes is a neat little thing for that. I think I covered most everything.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right,
Take
so
over the screen.
let me grab it back and let's see if it's a good time. I think we're doing okay on time. Where are we at now? 36. Okay, yeah, mine won't be too bad. Things that are parent, like plugins and tools, there's a lot of integrations that you may or may not have on your website. So these are things that, again, this is more food for thought and may not apply to everybody's situation, but things to look out for. One is any online forms on your site, and most websites these days have some kind of online form, whether it's a contact form, anything else basically like that. So for those, you want to check in the plugin settings for the whatever online form tool you're using, whether it's Gravity Forms, etc. Look at the email notifications. That's one thing. Going back to my email discussion, make sure those are still appropriate. So if you got rid of an email account, or just double check that there's been a transition of the website, make sure that's still okay. If there's any integrations on the back ends of forms, like some, for example, maybe it's going to HubSpot, a CRM tool, or a donor management tool, or Google Docs, things like that. There's another point where you want to see, hey, wait a minute, who's managing this and who has access to those things? So you may start building out your account list that you need to identify things a little bit more. And any payment processors. So if you have any online forms that are connected to PayPal or Stripe or anything like that, again, is that connected properly? Do you have the access to those accounts too? So these are things that may not immediately be obvious, but as you dig a little bit deeper and peel the layers of the onion, these might be more things you want to look out for.
Yeah. Hey, Ray, real quick.
Yep.
So for the online forms, the email notification, really important, especially if you've got a form that like generates leads and it's going to somebody who's not there, that type of thing is really important. If you're using a form plugin that also keeps in the database a record of all the entries, being able to look at those entries and see who they should go to, and then kind of tracking them, did they get to their destination, is another way to do some of this kind of forensics and stuff, and go, wow, we got all these leads and nobody's managing them because they're not going to anybody.
Right.
So that gives you a clue of what's actually happening on the site. So.
Point. And then if you're taking over an e-commerce site and someone's handing you the keys, well, that's there's a lot to learn on WooCommerce, and then we don't have time to cover that, but you really want to go through those settings as well too. Make sure the contact information. There's so many. I mean, WooCommerce has its own set of like 12 different tabs of pieces there. So I mean, most likely you're not going to need to change a lot, but at least contact information. Make sure that's still okay. And same thing, the payment processors, add-ons. WooCommerce is a little notorious for this too. That if, let's say you're connecting to a real-time shipping provider or order fulfillment thing, those are probably paid WooCommerce plugins. So back to the plugin idea, these may be plugins that aren't necessarily apparent immediately, but who's paying the licenses of those? Or do you have access to that? Do you have access to the WooCommerce account where you can change those settings and renew those? So that's something to look out for. And broader picture beyond the website itself, if it's been a transition, look at the social media accounts. First off, some of those may be connected directly or indirectly to the website. So maybe there's some automated posting that's happening. So if you're using something like Jetpack, for example, Jetpack, if you post a blog post, that may be connected to your social media accounts. You may be using a third-party tool like, my mind drew a blank there. It's not, starts with an H, Hootsuite or something like that, where those are posting things for you. So again, try to find out who is doing the social media management. That might be a different person who did the website, but if you're owning the website, it's all lands on your lap. And just like we talked about before about other accounts, make sure you can access the social media accounts. And same thing, look at those user roles too. Maybe they've added a bunch of people to their Facebook group, as admins, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe they don't need to be admins anymore if there's been a transition. A couple other ones just to, again, keep on your radar. You may or may not have these things. So Google services, or it could be plenty of these. Google Analytics is probably a very key one. So, check if your site has Google Analytics installed. You can go back. I think we've done some previous presentations on that. There's some tools you can use to find out whether Analytics is installed. But you want to make sure you have access to that Analytics account, or at least, because otherwise you kind of lose the history of all those analytics and have to recreate, create a new account and then re-implement that on your website. Same goes with Google Search Console too. So anything related to that, see if you have access to it. Google Business Listing, if this is a small business or a local business, who has access to that? That's make sure it's claimed, make sure the previous person's claimed it and has given you access to that. If there's Google Maps, if there's any Google Maps embedded on the website, that's now a paid thing too. So somebody has that associated to their account. So that could be billing. Usually it's free up to, it's some crazy number, like 2,000 map searches per month. But, and again, something you just want to make sure that somebody's accounted for that and that doesn't disappear and break. You see that quite a bit, that people have broken Google Maps APIs on websites. And reCAPTCHA, we talked about reCAPTCHA in our, in our spam presentation last week, but that's associated to somebody's Google account. So make sure you have access to that. So otherwise, all those reCAPTCHA things won't work anymore on your site. And that's a lot here. And again, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, just real quick with the Google services, this is one that very often gets set up in a personal Google account. If you're lucky that it was set up in maybe one of those, kind of the business name at gmail.com accounts and that you have access to. But if, again, in the transition and all, somebody has that, being added as an owner of that account would be important. So creating a Google account, having a Gmail Google account that then you can be you have your analytics, your search console transferred. So everything kind of lives the same, but now you have access to it, and then that other person could then be removed as an owner, or things you could do.
Yeah. A couple other ones just to wrap things up too. So other integrations, again, these may be direct or indirect to your website, but again, I'm thinking about this kind of broader. So any newsletters, things like MailChimp or Constant Contact. So maybe your website has a pop-up where people sign up to a mailing list. That's something to look for and say, all right, well, who has access to the, those accounts? Or do does somebody, did you get those user IDs and passwords? Any website monitoring services, this is probably unlikely, but if you see something on the site like managed WP, or I forget what it's necessarily called these days, that means that somebody else, possibly you've had a maintenance plan or some service on the website. So there's someone else is doing backups of your site and doing updates of your site. If you want to continue those, you just need to understand who is paying for that, and is that something to continue or not? Peter talked about CDN services, so Cloudflare. A lot of hosts now seem to be building this in directly, so you may not have to go through this process of getting access to it. But if the site's been set up a long time ago, Cloudflare was yet another separate account that would then connect to your website to do things like a content delivery network. That's what CDN means. And then these are kind of ancillary things too. So, YouTube, Vimeo. So, for the most part, just think about, like, this goes back to the context and history discussion we had in the beginning. How is this website being used? And in this website, you also want to ask questions, broader questions of what's the social media like? What other digital marketing things are going on? So, unfortunately, a lot of times I've found, I'm involved in a couple nonprofits, just in non-paid positions, just helping them out. And once you're the website guy, it's just you get everything. So every computer thing in the world gets dumped onto you, and then you're left to figure it out. So if you've inherited something, usually you don't inherit just the website. This is kind of a misleading title. You usually inherit the whole thing. So I think that's the last of my slides. So, final thoughts on what's next. We'll send out links to resources. I'll actually unmute everyone not to, because I think all the people here are people we can trust now.
I hope so.
You can unmute yourself. If you stuck through this and you're a Zoom bomber,
Exactly. Yeah.
Good for you. So yeah, again, I think this is something we've all been in a position with, in terms of inheriting something. So, and this wasn't meant to be an overwhelming list of information, but it is to give some context. Like Peter said, I try to do this too. Over time, I've learned to do a handoff to clients, because I've had clients who are like, yeah, once you're done with the website, I want to own it. I said, well, okay, which is fine by me. I don't want to own or maintain every site. I try to put together a similar kind of package and say, here's what you got, and here's what I put in place. So it's just being aware of that, that most websites these days, it's not just the WordPress ID and password, it's all these other ancillary things.
Yeah. And to that point, if you're doing work for somebody, you should be handing over all the details. And if you're having work done for you, you should now be more and more aware of the types of details that you would need to get. Because again, we've experienced things where all of a sudden somebody was like, I don't know who's doing this part, and now it's not working, or, oh, I had to call that guy and he's not cooperating, and it's like, just avoiding this. A lot of these topics, being able to say, in terms of even your own site, a personal site, just having all of this stuff in a place that you can get at, or somebody else can get at, is really important. This is a digital legacy that we have, and making sure that things can persevere is important.
So I appreciate all the comments too. We have a couple of minutes if people have any other. I think we had a lot of good discussion in the comments section. And sorry about having to mute everyone.
And if anyone, now we open it up. If anybody even has a question in general, or a problem that they're having, or something like that, right? We can.
Welcome. Exactly. Feel free to be able to unmute yourself and share your stories of, have you inherited a site? Are you currently about to inherit a site? Anything we didn't cover that you're still concerned about? Sue asked, have we developed a site audit checklist? I haven't done one specifically, like covering everything we covered tonight. It's a good idea to probably have everything in place that we covered tonight. I've done site audits more in terms of like performance and SEO kind of site audits. I haven't done anything specifically like similar to this. Like I said, I in some ways, that template I showed in the beginning least that's better than nothing, having that list of accounts and, IDs and what everything does. So it's, for me, that works in most cases, at least having the login credentials. I really like the plugin that you showed, Peter, though, of having the notes, because that's a missing piece. And again, I wish that was built, baked into WordPress. If every time you install a plugin, wouldn't it be great if you could just say, why am I doing this? Who did this? Why? Those kind of things.
I don't mind. I'm going to put the link into this website owner's manual. It's geared. It's a paid item, but some of our folks might be interested in at least knowing kind of what the topic is about. If you're okay with that, Ray, but it's the idea.
Go ahead, please.
It's all about recurring revenue from care plans, but again, being a responsible provider of a service to be able to say, okay, you can have, but I'm going to responsibly give you all the information that you need, and understand that there's a lot of information to have. So if you were to look at that, it is packaged in a way that is, it's not only a checklist, but it's like, here's all the information, place to put it, but it's packaged in a, and if you don't want to deal with this, have I got a deal for you kind of thing. But in terms of the overall topic, it might be something of interest.
And it's tough. I mean, kind of going back to the beginning of, especially I keep thinking nonprofits, for whatever reason, as we went through this committee, because I've dealt with a lot of nonprofits with this handoff, and I get it. A lot of nonprofits are just happy to have anyone building their site for them. Yeah. So they don't ask a lot of questions. And then, somebody like myself comes along for whatever reason, volunteering or something. And I'm like, ooh, where is everything? And you find out, oh, the guy who built it, like I said, it's the brother of, the son of, and yeah, nothing's documented. So, well, like I said, hopefully we gave you some ideas for things to look out for. Again, we'll send out a link to the recording afterwards, as well as a link to our Facebook group. Definitely ask questions there. We'll probably have time too next month. Like I said, we're going to try to cover, I think, the new WordPress version, but we'll leave some time there at the end too. I'd like to kind of get back to that a little bit. Of if people have questions, we're happy to spend time before the main presentation. It won't be recorded. We don't want to shame you or scare you, but we're happy to look at sites here live too. If people have questions about things, obviously we can't do a full scale audit of your site, but I'd like to have time here to answer questions as well.
So yeah, you reading the comments?
Oh, let's see.
You've got a good question and a great offer.
Looks like they created their own WordPress theme for it. I'm sorry. It looks like they created their own WordPress theme for it. I couldn't at first find anything about the theme. Yeah, those are.
Yeah.
I would say, go ahead. Well, I was going to say, some is understanding what that theme was trying to do, and some of the scary sites I've taken over, there are themes that were also built on advanced custom fields and custom post types. So those, and again, that's the way sites were built back. Depends on how old the site was. A lot of sites in the past, I've seen sites where the developers were trying to make things easier for their clients, because the client could put in a bunch of information into custom fields. And then meanwhile, behind the scenes, there's a bunch of PHP code that's reading these custom fields and doing that kind of stuff. Sounded great 5-6 years ago, but now you want to do a simple change. You got to go in there and start changing PHP code and adding custom fields. So I would say it depends on how easy that theme is to understand. Unfortunately, it could be messy.
Yeah, the power, the beauty, and the I don't know, the other side of all that of WordPress is there's so many ways to do the same thing, and especially a period of time when oh, I build websites in WordPress, but they're coding PHP files, and they're really not. I'm not a coder. I would call myself a builder. And to go in and find that and say, what have they built into this custom theme? Quite honestly, sometimes it's just rock solid and it's okay. And I've heard stories of themes that last 10 years without an issue because they're so basic and whatever. But at some point it breaks. That's when I'm looking at a website and going, what would it take to rebuild the site, even if I didn't redesign it? And you might say, by the time I'm trying to reverse engineer something, I could just have made the site new. The beauty about WordPress is you've got, your content is sitting in a database. So your posts and your pages are database information. So now you're just wrapping a lot of stuff around it. And it may simply be easier and safer. And generally be the approach I would take to say, what can I do to put it in a modern, transferable, supported by many platform versus something proprietary and, oh boy, I need a developer to do anything. And I've dealt with sites like that where like I'm reverse engineering to find out how this one line landed in this one spot in the site, and it was coded in a PHP file somewhere. So
that's where I think having that staging site to play around with, or the backup, like Sue and others have mentioned, that's kind of your first step is take a backup or something of that site, put it to staging, and try switching the theme. I mean, that's the one beauty about WordPress. It's easy enough to switch to. So we've been using Kadence for our demos and stuff. See what breaks, and that'll start giving the starting point to understand what was this other theme doing. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, again, thanks everyone for joining our session. If you have questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to us. Other topic suggestions, we're always, like I said, happy to hear other topics, and we'll send out the recording link afterwards, as well as any other links to things we discussed today. So,
Wonderful.
Thanks everyone. Have a good night. See you again next month.
Thanks.